In fact, you are going to see that any expansionary impact, fiscal, a shock, okay, so shifts IS to the right, contractionary shifts where what? Contractionary impacts, whatever they are, so they shift IS to the left. Is that right? You see, guys? That's why I told you in the past, you can finish macroeconomics because there is only two possibilities for IS, right, left. Is that right? I mean, you are not facing with 1 million possibilities. That's it. So, for the sake of experiment, once for whole life, suppose government applies contractionary monetary policy using a tax cut. You see, I am not going to take your time for that. You know what happens again, okay? So, planned expenditure shifts up, and you know why. We have done this before. So, consumption function shifts up. Previous one, okay, G is directly changed. Look at here, I keep formulas around to just remind you what's going on here, okay? So, the same game. Can you see that? Planned expenditure. So output goes up, but for that interest rate. Or if your initial planned expenditure was PE2 because choosing R2, so you go to E'2, more output. Okay. So as you can see, IS shifts to the right. Okay, so don't forget that IS can shift to the right or to the left only. Okay, so it doesn't shift up, it doesn't shift diagonally. I can show you textbooks. That they show that IS shifts like this. That is wrong. Of course, the result will be the same, but philosophically, IS can shift to the right or left only. Why? Because you remember first floor, when we were discussing goods market alone, for goods market alone, interest rate is fixed. So for any given fixed interest rate, points can go to the right or to the left. Okay, so popular mistake that you can see around. Okay, now, you see, we learned the shift. Now, let me put this in the context of the whole economy, IS and N. You see, this was what? This was for goods market isolated, disconnected, okay? But now, let's put together both economies, both markets, okay? So, now, you remember my habit. Now I am talking about, because the midterm test is over, you are talking about final exam. Final exam, when I have a shock, I have a policy, whatever impact, part A, I am going to ask you to draw the graph. You remember midterm test? I promised you for midterm test and I just did it. You remember that? The same thing. We keep doing the same thing. So, anybody? What happened? You see, we have done the exercise before. We are not going to explain. Okay, so what happens? When G goes up, from graphical point of view, what happens? Part A of the question. Sorry, yes? IS shifts to the right. See, we have done everything. We do everything. I don't miss any step. I show you. Okay, so IS here. Now, look at here. Here, interest rate is not fixed anymore because now you have feedback. This feedback comes from what? Money market. Don't forget that. When I am discussing money market alone, income is given, isolated. When I talk about goods market is alone. It's disconnected, there's no feedback. But here we have feedback. And as you can see, yeah, interest rate pretty much goes up and income goes up too. Is that right? Okay, that was part 1 of the question, okay? You know that. The same thing for final exam, guys. If you want to ask me the format of the final exam, of course, don't forget the algebra, but I do most of the algebra in tutorials, okay? So algebra, it means what? It means you have IS, you have LM. When algebraically, when you intersect IS and LM graphically, algebraically means what? You are solving two equations to find two unknowns, Y and R. So graph, algebra, get ready for algebra. You know, I give you the functions numerically, and as you had in your midterm test for first part. And my favorite part, intuitive part. Intuitive part. Yeah, this graph is very good, but if somebody asks you, so why when G goes up, interest rate goes up, output goes up eventually? So how do you explain that in a simple way? You remember all steps, causality chain of events. So you have to write that down. You should be able to explain that. Okay, now, this is familiar, is that right? How many times have you repeated this? Okay, by now you know that. Okay, guys, anyone? Anyone wants to help here? So when G goes up, what happens exactly next? So you remember, I told you and I did it. If you, in that case, if you missed one step, we deducted half a point. Okay, you get your paper, you can see that. That's the plan for final exam too, okay? So G goes up. What happens exactly next? So we have done this a few times in the past. When government spending goes up, what happens exactly next? Yes?
Public saving goes down. Public saving goes down.
That approach is long run. You remember that? So now this is short run. This is new. This is a new horizon. Okay, go ahead. Planned expenditure. Planned expenditure. You see, we just because he mentioned that he is right for long run. You are in long run. Capital fixed, labor fixed, technology fixed. Output is fixed at by bar. You remember full employment output. Therefore, when G goes up, right away we could talk about what? Saving. But now, did you see that? No, output can change. This is short run. Okay, you remember short run was what? Oh, just a reminder. I told you, until further notice, this is short run, price is fixed, and firms sell as much as they can at that fixed price. Okay? Okay, so, okay, you said what? I don't know. Sorry. So, planned expenditure rises. Planned expenditure rises. Okay? What happens next? Anyone? Yes.
IS purchase, right?
Sorry.
The IS purchase, right?
Oh, okay. That is so important. If you see, you remember I told you please make sure I gave you the warning for midterm test. For this part, please don't explain the graph. You remember part A of the question. Okay, you shifted IS curve already. Okay, so I know that. Here I want what? I want pure step by step the chain of events. Okay, so yeah, IS we already shifted IS. Okay, but you remember planned expenditure goes up. So it means what? It means all of a sudden in goods market you have excess demand. Excess demand. At the same price, excess demand, firms can sell more than what they produce. But how they can sell at more than they produce, they sell out of what? Anybody? So they sell out of inventories. Inventories. So in this case, next step is inventory levels start falling. And when inventory levels are falling, firms know that demand is strong and they increase output. Do you see that? So we explain this part. Okay? So now I need to explain this part. Anybody? When income goes up, output goes up, income goes up, what happens exactly next? Anyone? You see? This is the difference when you are dealing with only goods market versus goods market and money market together. You see, if it was, as we did in chapter 11, if it was goods market alone, that was the end of the story. You remember that? Okay, but not here. Here, this signal is sent to what? Money market. How? So when income goes up, what happens in money market? Demand for money goes up. You see that? So the impact, the wave goes to money market. Demand for money goes up. Okay? So it means people need liquidity. People need liquidity. But don't forget that. I assume that central bank doesn't do anything here. So supply of real money is fixed. Demand for money goes up. How do people get liquidity? Sorry?
Cell phone.
Exactly. She remembers things. In short term, wealth is fixed. Your portfolio, we talked about people's portfolio, money versus bond. So when total wealth is fixed, demand for money goes up, it means demand for bonds falls, and then that means, as exactly she said, people tend to sell bonds, okay? So what is next? Imagine everybody shows downtown to sell bonds. There is no buyer. Okay, let her say. You already, yes?
The price of bonds drop.
Exactly. Bonds become cheaper. When bonds become cheaper, then what happens next? You remember we talked about bonds market? Relationship between price of bond and yield, or we call it here interest rate. Okay? So negative. You see? Interest rate rises. When interest rate rises, investment falls. Investment falls. Also, I told you the story about also. When I write also, it means consumption rises because income rises, tax is fixed, disposable income rises. Therefore, you remember in this model, consumption is only a function of disposable income. Okay? So I told you, when I write also, any change here is out of order, out of causality order. So in fact, this consumption rises, it should be here, after income, is that right? But it's kind of dead end. I want that avenue that tells me everything. So I told you, whenever you want to write something out of the order, you put it here. Okay? So, see, we explained everything. And please, I begged you, okay, last time, before midterm test, when you are writing intuitive part, don't try to explain graph. You don't receive any mark. Okay? Because in part, actually you have to be careful. I told you before the test. Sometimes I ask you the reasons for shifts. Okay? But that is if I ask you directly. But if I ask you the causality relation, okay, so you don't need to explain the graph. Is that going back to your comment? Okay. So this is short run equilibrium. Did you see that? So graph in intuitive explanation and also algebra. Algebra that you are doing the algebraic part mostly in your tutorial exercises. You don't have time to go through that. Okay. Actually, at this point, I have to remind you something very important, which has been confusion among the students in the past. It goes back to this. So, expansionary fiscal policy, output rises. Is that right? Interest rate rises, is that right? Okay. Now, you remember in chapter 11, we talked about G multiplier. Remember that? G multiplier? So, G multiplier was what? was 1 over 1 minus margin of profit to consume. You remember that? Okay? You have to be very careful. This G multiplier, please go back to your notes. We derived this G multiplier when interest rate was fixed. Please double check your notes. When we had only what? Goods market. When we had only goods market. Okay? So, but look at here. That G multiplier doesn't apply here. Why? Because interest rate goes up here. So it violates the assumption of derivation of this formula. Or your T multiplier. T multiplier was the same thing in marginal probability to consume in numerator. Of course, with the negative sign here. Okay? So, G multiplier and T multiplier, the famous one that people get, 1 over 1 minus MPC, that is based on the assumption that interest rate is fixed. So I have seen students in the past that they continuously use that as a G multiplier. Okay, but it doesn't apply in this case. In this case, as you can see, interest rate rises. So what does that mean? It means this. You can hear that amount, the famous one, 1 over 1 minus MPC. Okay, you see, if you keep interest rate fixed, that represents increase in output this much. Can you see it here? See? This much. However, when interest rate, so when there is a feedback from money market to goods market, interest rate is changing, that multiplier doesn't hold anymore. Okay, so be careful. So I have seen in the past people continuously use that multiplier all the time. That is not the case. That is when interest rate is fixed. Now, in this case, when interest rate goes up, investment goes down. Is that right? So this decrease in investment partly offsets in this initial increase in output. Okay, look at here. So let me write it nicely here. See here? So if interest rate is fixed, given this multiplier, increase in output is this much, but here you have partial offset because interest rate goes up, investment falls. So that's why instead of this point, you end up this point. So it means net effect is smaller than previous case in chapter 11. Okay, so it means what? It means when interest rate is not fixed, interest rate is changing and investment is a function of interest rate, therefore G multiplier is smaller. Can you see that? It's smaller. Because why is smaller? Because part of increase in output is offset by increase in output and reduction in G multiplier. So the same thing for T multiplier. Okay? So let me refresh your memory. Let me go back to my explanation. Look at here. Look at here. So here G goes up, output goes up. Did you see that? But look at end of the story. You have a partial offset by reduction in investment. In chapter 11, that part was not there. All right, so be careful. Actually, in your exercises, there is an exercise ask you to calculate G multiplier when interest rate is not fixed. Okay, so it means when you have ISLM care. So of course, G multiplier, T multiplier in your Excel would be bigger, a bigger formula. Okay, but you can say overall they are smaller. They are smaller. Is that right? Because of this fact. Okay, so it's just algebra, lots of algebra. So I left it in your tutorials. Okay. Any fiscal change. Similarly, we are going to practice shocks, okay? So, and also remember what I told you for midterm test. So I told you, generally, in this course, when we talk about fiscal policies, my favorite policy is increasing G. Remember, I asked you to do what at home? So for every exercise that I do here, G increases, go home, G goes down, T goes up, T goes down. Is that right? So you can practice 3 exercises by yourself. By the way, midterm test, remember I told you, I gave you a question like that. Okay, you remember that? So what did I ask? Tax cut? Tax cut, yes, you see? How many times I told you in class? So if you had listened to me and practiced that, so you would, so the same thing. I always use this, but go home and practice everything, graph, explanation. Okay, and they're very similar. They are 95% the same. Okay, so the same thing over there. Now, this is what goods market and ISK. Let's talk about money market. Remember, this is the second floor. We are practicing everything is second floor. Get ready to build third floor. Okay. So this is money market last time. Okay. So you remember how I constructed an M curve out of money market? Okay. So remember we talked about this. Goods market, money market work opposite of each other. Remember we talked about this. So in goods market produces equilibrium output given interest rate. And money market does exactly upside down. Okay? Given output, it produces what? Equilibrium interest rate. When these two markets communicate with each other, then you get what? Equilibrium of everything. That we should. Okay, so so here I constructed an M curve out of money market, but this time upside down. So you see, remember, I chose 2 arbitrary levels of income output. Is that right? I told you go home and make it 5, 6. Is that right? So, and then for each income level, we had demand for real money. Okay, you remember? Theory of liquidity preference, we talked about that. Extension of quantity theory of money. So I chose what? Refreshing your idea, your memory. So Y1, demand for money, real money 1. Y2, demand for money 2. Okay. And then I did all for 2. You can choose, I don't know, 5, is that right? So you get 5 different income levels, 5 different points, you connect them, is that right? We talked about this before. So this is my mechanism to develop LM curve. Now, anything, guys, anything that hits money market would have impact on LM curve, okay? For example, suppose the famous case, expansionary monetary policy. M goes up. What happens, anybody? If M goes up, isn't it easy? What happens? Supply of money by central bank goes up. In this structure, what happens? No one? Anyone? What happens? It should be easy. Money supply goes up, and more goes up. I guess you have a suggestion, are you? You do? So what happens? Oh, okay, look at here. We have done this exercise. So, Remember we are practicing first floor, so money supply shifts to the right. Is that right? So it doesn't matter how many income levels you choose, how many demand for money you have one supply curve. One supply curve, then central bank increases money supply. Is that right? Yes? So now look at that. If you were at this equilibrium, you end up here. If you were here, this equilibrium, you end up here. Let me show you. See here? Yes, everyone? It doesn't matter how many demand for real money you have. Is that right? So as you can see, for any income level, so let me get rid of this. Interest rate tends to fall. Okay? So look at that. So this R2 to R2 prime, both of them are for corresponding 2 by 2. And the same thing for E1. Is that right? So, starting now to the rest of this course, whenever we talk about expansionary monetary policy, what do? We shift an M curve simply down. Is that right, everyone? So, an M curve shifts down. So I am not going to explain that in future. That here. Is that right? Once for all life. Once for all life. Okay, that was what? Here I assume that there is no money market. Sorry, goods market. You know that here? So I know that an M curve shifts down when we talk about expansionary monetary policy. Now let's talk about the whole economy with feedback, goods market, financial market, money market, goods market, everything together. So graphical version, I just did this, but this time I have also IS in the picture. Is that right? Is that right? Okay, and you can see the outcome. Output goes up, interest rate goes down. Is that right, everyone? So graph. Algebra, of course, you do it in tutorials. So I give you functions. I give you consumption function, investment function, demand for real money function. I give you supply of money. You remember? Short run, price is fixed. The price. I ask you to find equilibrium point. Is that right? So that is algebra. Okay, but let's talk about my favorite part. Intuitive explanation. I repeated before. Please don't try to explain the graph again here, okay? Unless I ask you directly why curves shift, okay? Actually, I asked that question, as you will see, in third floor, our graphs become gradually more complicated, okay? So that makes, but for this is easy, is that right? Okay, anyone? Intuitive part. M goes up. How should I start? See, you are right out of the midterm test, so you should know this very well. Anyone? They have done this before. Money supply goes up. How should I start? And explain everything. Because somebody may ask me, when money supply goes up, why output goes up, goes up, and why interest rate goes down. Okay? So without referring to any technical concept. Okay? Anyone? Oh, you want to say something? Yes.
Access supply for money.
Okay, but central bank has to do something. Okay. Yes.
Bank buys bonds.
Yeah, central bank has to buy bonds. Is that right? If head of central bank goes and pray to God, please increase money supply, you don't go anywhere. Okay, exactly as he said. So central bank has to print money and then just go to the bonds market and start buying bonds. Okay, so you remember we talked about this in chapter 5. So different ways that central bank can increase money supply, but we use open market operation, which is more intuitive one. Okay, so central bank buys bonds. What happens next? What happens next? So when central bank buys bonds, all of a sudden output goes up. Is that the story? Yes. Sorry.
Price of bonds would then go up.
Yeah, you see, central bank is not me. I go to bonds market and buy what? $5,000 bonds. It doesn't change anything. But central bank is, central bank is a deep pocket person, agent, is that right? They are buying billions of dollars of bonds. So exactly as he said, price of bonds rises. And remember, bonds market relationship is negative between price of bond and interest rate. So interest rate falls. So when interest rate falls, investment rises. Is that right, everyone? Investment rises, but investment is part of what? Investment is part of planned expenditure. Planned expenditure. Okay. Planned expenditure, it means what? It means all of a sudden, there is excess demand for goods. So firms can sell more than they produce because price is fixed. So what do? They start selling out of inventories. So people start selling out of inventories, so inventory levels start falling. And firms realize that demand is strong, so what do? They increase output, okay? They increase output. Be careful. In short run, price is fixed, so firms cannot increase or decrease their output based on price signal. They go by what? Inventory signal. Is that right? This is short, remember? In microeconomics, whenever there is excess demand, they told you what? Price goes up. Is that right? But that is long run, classical approach. In macroeconomics, guys, generally they have classical approach. But in short run, we are Keynesian. Okay. So output rises, consumption rises too. So A is short-term equilibrium. Do you see that algebra, graph, and intuitive explanation? This is exactly the format of the questions for final exam. Is it the same path for midterm test? Now, context is larger. Okay? So, but it should be very, and by the way, how many times I did this? Okay? So, some of you could be sick of this repetition. I am going to repeat that 1,000,000 more times. Okay? So you see, you learn everything here. If you really focus here, you can learn everything here. Okay. Oh, you see, here this mechanism that we just talked. Okay, that if central bank increases money supply, income goes up. This is called the monetary transmission mechanism. Monetary transmission mechanism. It means what? It means the way that I just told you. Because there is one more reason that output can go up, different kind of mechanism that we talk about that in the future, okay? So this famous one, 99% of the time we use this one. So this is called monetary transmission mechanism. Okay. So guys, we practiced money market, goods market, okay, for policies. Of course, in a few minutes, I am going to practice shocks, okay? Which is the same, okay? And actually, before I forget, I think I forgot one thing here, one little thing. You remember I told you what? I told you IS always shifts to the right or left. Not up, not diagonal, okay? LM curve shifts up or down. Why? See, philosophy, I told you, I can show you textbooks. So draw the curve, shift in LM curve like this. Like diagonal or like right. Again, it would look the same, okay? But philosophically it is wrong. Why philosophically it is wrong? Because for money market, income is given, remember that? Income is coming from outside. Income is coming from outside. So when income is given, output is given, a point can go up or down. There is no freedom to go to the left or right, okay? So IS, always left, right, LM, up, down, okay? So the same thing for future. So We talked about goods market, we talked about S curve, policy, and M curve. Okay, you know that fiscal policies and monetary policies are controlled by two different policymakers. So G and T, M, money supply. Generally, government is in charge of G and T, fiscal policies. By government, I mean what? Executive branch of government, or judiciary system. Because government, if government wants to increase its expenditure, what should they do? They have to write a bill and send it to parliament. Is that right? You understand? So they decide on this. And central bank is in charge of money supply. Central bank is in charge of money supply. And generally, central bank doesn't answer to anybody. Okay? So that's why I personally believe in any economy, the strongest person is the head of central bank, because everybody else should respond, should answer questions. But central bank, okay? So actually, hopefully, they are independent. That's my point. So central bank in charge of M, government in charge of G and T, fiscal policies. Hopefully they are independent, okay? Generally, when these two groups are not independent, bad things happen. For example, have you seen some countries have continuously high inflation rate? Why? Because these two groups, central bank and government, they are dependent. So you work with first part, actually it was in your midterm, seniorage. Because when they are dependent, what happens? Government can increase spending by just printing money. Is that right? This is the easiest way to finance government expenditure. So you work seniorage, collecting seniorage, transferring what? Transferring purchase power from consumers to government. Because money is nothing, okay? It's just paper. How can you get real purchase power, seniorage, out of nothing? You print money, you create inflation. Inflation reduces people's money purchase power, but purchase power never vanishes. It just goes to government. Okay, so that's the plan. All countries with high inflation, it's just that. Okay, so for example, if I use my backbone country, okay. So if you look at government chart, it's very obvious. Government chart. Head of central bank is deputy to Ministry of Treasury. The person is not even minister, okay? He's a deputy minister. So it means what? It means the president can call minister of Treasury, print money, and bring it there. Actually, you know that these days they don't need to print money anymore. Many years ago, when we didn't have this digital money, I remember they ordered print money, put on the back of truck, and bring it to. But today they don't need it, because everything is just numbers, okay? Just accounts. So yeah, prime minister or president ask minister, because the person is in the cabinet, is a cabinet member, and minister calls the deputy. Print money, yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, and you know that money, we are going to see more. Actually, in chapter 5, you remember, inflation rate is equal to growth rate of money supply. If you print 10% more money, it means prices go up exactly by 10%. What the relationship is easy. So you end up with what? Officially, back in my country, we have 60-70% officially inflation rate, but personally, I think it's more than that. It's more than 100% per year inflation, because they ask Ministry of Information fixed numbers, is that right? Okay, to show inflation. So my point here is, it's a good idea if they are independent, okay? But they are independent, it doesn't mean politically, are you following Mr. Trump these days? He is actually insulting Fed chairman. He calls him slow, stupid, everything. Right? But he cannot do anything officially unless he pushes him to do what he wants, because he wants lower interest rate. Okay? I remember first term of Mr. Trump, first term. So in that time, I was teaching CO6. In CO6, I gave people a writing assignment. So in that time, I gave a writing assignment because 3 countries, at the same time, presidents were pushing head of central bank to reduce interest rate. Why they want lower interest rate? Because you know that real interest rate going down, investment goes up, your economy gets overheated, output goes up, unemployment goes down, and that is good in Mr. President's resume, right? So 3 countries, US, Mr. Trump, first period, Turkey, and India. So they have pretty much independent central banks, good. Okay, but at the same time, presidents of all 3 countries were pushing what? I asked people to go and write a paper about that, okay, to see what, actually it's very interesting. In all 3, head of central banks finally resigned. So much pressure. So for Trump, I forgot the name. You know what that lady was? The Federal Reserve chairperson. I forgot his name. You can search it. She just resigned. The same thing in Turkey and the same thing in India. So people more favorable people. Anyway, my point here is that hopefully they are independent, but be careful. Independent doesn't mean they ignore each other. They see each other movements and they can make their own move. Is that right? For example, remember the case? Increase in G. Yeah, you want that case? So increase in G. So I assume that money supply was fixed. You heard that? So in fact, when government increases G, central bank can do 3 things. Keep money supply fixed, keep interest rate fixed, keep output fixed. You see? These are all policies that can central bank do. Is that right? Central bank can do. Okay? Let's see each of them. So number 1. You see, this is increase in G. Okay, so if central bank keeps money supply fixed means an MPF remains here. So it means sometimes I call this policy doing nothing policy. Okay, central bank as a government increases G, and central bank just watches what's going on. Is that right? So what happens? In this case, money supply goes up, so output goes up. This is what we discussed a few minutes ago. I assume that central bank doesn't do anything. Is that right? But that is just one approach that central bank can do when sees central government policy. Okay. Yes, everyone? Everyone? Okay. Now, sometimes central bank decides to keep interest rate fixed. Can you see it here? So if central bank decides to keep interest rate fixed, can you see it here? Central bank has to apply an expansionary monetary policy. Do you see that? So actually, in this way, output goes up way more than before, because doing nothing policy, the one that we studied, output goes up this much. Now output goes up this much. Can you see that? More. Why more? Because you have two expansionary policies on top of each other. Monetary, fiscal at the same time. Okay? Actually, this policy is good for short run. Okay? Sometimes central banks, in order to remove uncertainty for investors, they do that. It's a very bad idea. I tell you next why this is not good in long run. Okay? See why central banks may want to do that? First of all, it is, for example, a central bank may decide to keep interest rate fixed. So you know that actually I am negotiating with my bank. I told you I guess before. I am renewing my mortgage. Okay, so in fact I had a meeting yesterday with them, and the major question is, they said, okay, do you want fixed mortgage or variable mortgage? So we are not sure, because what? Because more likely interest rate is going down. Is that right? Because I don't know. Remember US, if Trump winning the war against Federal Reserve, interest rate goes down in the US, so Canada has to bring down interest rates too. And also interest rate is already too high, so it cannot go higher. Can you see that? So my point here is investors want to know interest rate in future. Is that right? Because investment is already uncertain. Okay, so sometimes in short run, central banks, in order to keep uncertainty minimum level, they say, okay, guys, during next year, we keep interest rate fixed as is. Can you see that? There will not be further change in interest rate. Can you see that? So it means what? Central bank has to accommodate any change, any shift in IS. Can you see that? It doesn't matter. Here I use G, but it may not be G. Central bank has to continuously watch IS and offset shifts in IS. Okay? However, this is not good policy in long run. Why? Suppose, you see here, suppose point O is long run equilibrium. Long run equilibrium means what? Long run equilibrium means, suppose, remember long, so it means output is by bar. Initial equilibrium, suppose economy is already at full employment. So look at that. Increasing G overheats the economy. You remember the table I gave you in chapter 10? When output goes above a bar, in long run what happens? Price goes up, so you're going to get inflation. And so if you increase money supply on top of that, makes situation even worse. Okay? So you remember in long run economy must be at Y bar, central bank has to keep economy at Y bar. That is, in fact, we're going to discuss that. A stabilization policy. So this is not a stabilization. So again, this is good for short run, removing uncertainty, okay? But as we are going to discuss in future, possibly to keep economy at full employment, so central bank, especially when initial output, suppose initial output is Y bar, so central bank has to make sure what? Output is at Y bar. Okay, so this policy is good policy in the long run. Okay, so and also you know that when economy when economy remains at Y bar, so it means there is no need for inflation is not created. You remember Y equals Y bar, price doesn't change. Okay, you have a prescription table that today we are going to use it. Okay, so in fact, some economists believe that this is a policy that central bank has to do all the time. Keeping economy at Y bar, okay? Because there is a chapter that they talk about that chapter in CO6. If you take CO6, they talk about policy making, okay? Should we active in policy making or we should not intervene, okay? And what's the job of central bank? So generally you know that historically central bank was created to fight with inflation, nothing else. nothing else, okay? So it means central bank, based on that view, central bank has to always keep output that Y bar, okay? So, okay. But that chapter is in CO6, they teach that in CO6, we are not going to touch over that. So here, see, if central bank is supposed to keep output based, so central bank has to offset fiscal policy. See, by contractionary monetary policy. By contractionary monetary policy. You see that? So actually previous one we call that accommodation. Central bank accommodates government spending. Here we are talking about offsetting fiscal policy. Of course, it comes at the cost. What is the cost? It is that interest rate is too high. Interest rate would be too high. Can you see here? See? Because two policies, expansionary fiscal policy and contractionary monetary policy, both of them tend to increase interest rate. Therefore, interest rate goes too high. Okay? Okay. So, we talked about policies. Let's talk about shocks. Actually, shocks work the same way. Why shocks work the same way? Because you remember IS goes up or down. LM, sorry. IS goes to the right to left. LM goes up or down. You see, you have only these four possibilities. That's why I always ask people, please don't get overwhelmed by the story. Translate the story to IS up or down or LM. Oh, why am I making this mistake today? IS going right, left, LM goes up or down. So be careful. It doesn't matter. Story doesn't matter. Okay? For example, shocks. You know, I may come up with a strange looking shock, but who cares? Okay? Because shock is either to goods market, IS, or shock could be in money market, LM. That's it. Okay? Let me give you examples. So, IS, shock to IS. For example, one famous case is this case. So housing market, stock market, if you have housing market collapse, stock market crash, or boom, other way around. So that could affect goods market through what? Through consumption. Through consumption. How? How is it possible? You see? Because again, not in this course, CO6 we'll talk about two Nobel Prize winning consumption functions. Those Nobel Prize winning consumption functions, they show you that consumption is a function of wealth. You remember the consumption function that we are using in MGEB06 is what? A function of disposable income. Yes, okay. They show you that consumption function is not in fact this. It's in fact wealth. CO6. What is wealth? By the way, lifetime wealth. Whatever that affects your lifetime wealth. And they tell you your lifetime wealth is including what? Your lifetime labor income. You work, how much you work. For example, after graduation, you get a job offer paying you $200,000 a year. Can you see that? All of a sudden, your wealth, lifetime wealth goes up. Okay? So, if I get fired from my job, my lifetime wealth goes down. So, number one, labor income. Number two, financial wealth. Financial wealth like what? Market, stock market. Value of stocks. Or physical wealth, physical assets. Like what? Houses, housing market. That's why stock market and housing market are so important. You know that historically, all recessions created by housing crash and stock market crash. So the only difference was which one happens first. Great Depression, stock market crashed first, and then housing market crashed second. But you guys don't remember the recent 2008, 2009, you were kids, I think. Okay, so if you go and check, housing market crashed first, and then stock market. So order doesn't matter. Because people's wealth, for any reason, job market, housing market, stock market. So you see, change in household wealth. So you see, they shift in consumption function and shift in what? ISK. Okay. This is a shock. So actually, have you heard about that? I heard. These days, housing market doesn't look good. So somebody told me that in past few months, at least in the first half of this year, price of houses went down by, I don't know, 10, 15%. I'm not sure, I just heard. You see, this has negative impact on consumption, okay? So, actually, you see, wealth is, again, they talk about that in details in CO6. So how do we capture that in BO6? We, stock market, money market, a housing market, and remember, job market. Three sources of wealth. Okay, so we combine them in consumer confidence, consumer sentiment. Okay, so how poor, how rich people feel depends on their. Don't forget that wealth, lifetime wealth, is nothing that you know now. Is that right? It's about today's situation and future status of economy. Okay, so actually we measure that using an index called consumer confidence or consumer sentiment index. Okay, actually in this course, as I said, we are going to look at that as a form of shift in consumption. So you remember, functional shift. So this is how we capture this part before CO6. So by shifting IS, functional shift. So consumer confidence, consumer sentiment, or sometimes we call that optimism, pessimism. Okay, so that shifts consumption and shifts IS here. So change in private consumption at any disposable income, or business and investors sentiment or confidence. So investors optimism, investors pessimism. So this is what? Here we have functional shift in investment function. Investment function. So change in investment at any level of income and interest rate. Did you see that? We have functional shift. Can you see that? No variable may change. So, and also shocks to LM curve. Shocks to LM curve, the most popular shock in money market goes back to change in demand for money. Demand for money. So demand for money changes. You see, we talked about this before. You remember that? So availability of credit cards, availability of ATMs, availability or expansion of online banking. So they are affecting, so any change in money market, any change in money market, any technological change in banking industry, okay, financial industry, okay, so affects demand for money, okay. So you have exercises in your tutorials. So how more ATMs, more credit cards, so can affect your demand for money. Now, let's talk about S-curve. Actually here I have a few slides that you don't have because they are kind of recent. So how do we measure consumer confidence? Because this is something in people's head, all right? So we have something called the oldest one, the oldest and the most famous consumer sentiment index is called Consumer Sentiment Index by University of Michigan. A professor in 1960, I think, started creating this. So he started, it is still done the same way today, but now it's a very big business, okay? During 60s, it was his personal thing, okay? So it's a survey by phone. They call people and ask them several questions about, you remember, their views about current and future status of economy. They ask you, are you better off than last year? Do you think next year you are going to be better off than today? Can you see that? From financial point of view, I told you, do you feel richer? Do you feel poorer? Okay. So, at interest rate, you remember I told you I am worrying about interest rate? Because we need to continuously renew mortgages, not renew, getting loans, buying houses, buying car loans. Is that right? So interest rate is very important. If you want to just walk along the street, you have to know what is. So any home renovation, so you need to know interest rate. So that is important. So they ask you, what do you think about interest rate? My $1 million question today. Or what do you think about inflation? Is that right? Inflation rate is important. For example, I know my wage rate is the same this year and next year. If inflation is high next year, so it means what? My salary is the same, but purchase power of my salary would be lower. Can you see that? That's why they ask about your view about inflation, okay? So, many questions. You can Google it and see questions, and then they combine them, and they create a number, an index out of 100. Okay, so they call that consumer sentiment index, okay? So did I show this before? I mean, I guess I showed you this. This was last year. Consumer sentiment index in the US. Last year I was teaching CO6. So this is, I am following Bloomberg in Twitter, X, new X, okay? So last year, US consumer sentiment rose for several months. This is monthly. Monthly means what? Monthly means we are very worried about this factor, okay? We are worried about this factor. So 5 months in a row, consumer sentiment index went up. So it means what? It means it looks like people are becoming optimistic about future of economy, so it means consumption function shifts up. The same interest rate, the same income, people consume more, okay? So, of course, this year, this happened March, this was published March 25, I mean, just a few months ago, okay? So, did you see that? Guys, this didn't look good. Can you see that? How many months? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 months in a row, consumer confidence went down. Not good. So in CO6, they are talking about that, leading indices. When this goes down, probability of a recession goes up, right? So now let's see in our model. Okay, so in our model, when we talk about consumer, higher consumer confidence, higher consumer sentiment, or optimism, be careful. Words don't matter, stories don't matter, is that right? So you need just translate. So now, graphically, what happens, guys? So when you see consumer sentiment, is it optimism or pessimism? Oh, pessimism. So it means when you see consumer sentiment index is going down, so what happens to ISLM curves? Sorry?
Shifted loss.
Yeah, which one?
The IS curve.
IS curve, exactly. Remember, this is a shock to goods market. Negative shock. Negative shock means what? Left. Exactly, she's right. Is that right? So what happens is income goes down, interest rate goes down. So graph, so if you have a story like this, final exam, I ask you to draw the graph, you draw the graph. Okay? It could be a numerical example. A numerical example. So you have to solve this. Is that right? So consumption function is changing. Then you have to find new equilibrium. Okay? So that reminded me for final exam, guys, bring a calculator. Because for midterm test, some of you didn't bring a calculator. We have a numerical questions. Is that right? We have numerical questions. Okay, actually let's take 15 minutes break and then we are going to continue this whole thing. So please come back 10:45.